Okay, think I'm recording. Let's do this. Okay, hello. My name is David Lassard. This is ethanol, a biofuel. All right, there we go. All right, so what is ethanol? Well, ethanol is a chemical compound. It is C2H6O. That doesn't really matter. This is biology, not chemistry. But it has two primary uses for alcohol and fuel. We'll just be talking about fuel because we're talking about biofuels. All right, alcohol doesn't matter. It is produced by fermenting the starches found in grain, and the most commonly used grain is corn. It can also be made from sorghum, barley, sugarcane, sugar beets, tree, grass, a bunch, anything that's organic, pretty much, it can be made from. But corn is the most common one. All right. So how is ethanol produced? Well, it goes through two different processes. First, you have these biomass feedstocks. That's a fancy way of saying farms. So like I said, corn is the most common biomass feedstock, but there are a variety of different ones. And this is farms and plants that are specifically tailored just to ethanol production, not towards normal food consumption. So then our little picture over here will show you that first you get your corn, and then it's ground up into this cornmeal, and then water is added, and then using that water, it is broken down to starches and then to sugar, and then once it's broken down to sugar, it's fermented into ethanol, and then after it is fermented, it is distilled, and finally we add some unnatural stuff, and that's the denaturation process that makes it so that you don't drink fuel. Yeah. All right. So, ethanol usage. Ethanol is very, very prevalent in America. 98% of all U.S. gas contains 10% ethanol. Most gas is a 10% ethanol to 90% gasoline ratio. It is other kinds of fuel. There's flex fuel, which has varying different levels of ethanol and gasoline. It goes up. The highest it goes up to is an 83% ethanol to 17 gasoline mixture. Other options are currently being researched. So trees and grasses are currently being looked at as an alternative to corn. But right now they're not really being used because they're not very economically viable. They're just not efficient enough. So what is the effect of ethanol on the environment? Well, we'll start with the positives. Ethanol burns cleaner than conventional fossil fuels. This is very good. We like that. However, it still produces a large amount of CO2 emissions. These CO2 emissions come from obviously just burning the fuel in a car, in a train, whatever uses the fuel. That's obviously the biggest amount of emissions, but there's also emissions simply getting these all set up and building them, because you have to build them up, extract it. Transportation of the ethanol is just very not very nature friendly as well. But on the plus side, part of the CO2 produced is canceled out by the oxygen produced by the biomass feedstocks, which, as we discussed earlier, is a fancy way of saying corn farms. Because, in case you don't know, photosynthesis makes oxygen. I know, crazy stuff. So, But on the other side, it requires a lot of land to produce ethanol, which leads to deforestation and further CO2 emissions. So, what's the economic impact of using ethanol? There's some positives and there's some negatives. So the positives is that it creates a lot of jobs, especially in rural areas where jobs are harder to come by, though they can be very valuable. Ethanol production accounted for 73,000 jobs in 2021. Ethanol is also overall cheaper than gasoline, with it being, I believe, $63 to $100 for the same amount of fuel, and $100 being oil. Ethanol, however, on the negative side, ethanol production increases the prices of other products. For example, because you now have to compete corn for both just food consumption and also fuel consumption, it starts to rapidly increase the price of corn. In the early 2000s is when ethanol really started to become popular, and the production increased a lot. And during that same time, you can see that corn prices doubled from $2 to $4 in just a matter of 3 years. Now, this has a long-lasting effect on not just corn, but all other kinds of food, because corn is a very common, it is the most common food to give to animals. Cornmeal is given to chicken, to cows, to pigs, so it largely affects the meat industry as well. Simply because corn becomes so expensive, the more ethanol production we have. And then, as previously stated, the land required to use ethanol is a lot. It requires a lot of land usage to run these ethanol plants, and because of that, land prices start to go up as well the more ethanol we use. So what's the public opinion on ethanol? Overall, it's a pretty popular thing. Ethanol is supported by the federal government, so with that, ethanol production is rapidly expanding due to government support, and yeah, the public generally likes ethanol production. In Iowa, 92% of citizens believe ethanol is important for their economy. And the only part it really receives criticism is due to what we talked about earlier, its impact on food prices and land consumption. Now, a large majority of information about ethanol is positive simply because it's being pushed out by the government. This is also probably due to why there's more support for ethanol, but that's overall people like it. They like it a lot. So here's my analysis. All right. So I think that ethanol is a very good alternative to gasoline. It burns cleaner and it's a cheaper alternative. Both very good things. It's also good for the environment because there's just less CO2 emissions, and part of the CO2 emissions are canceled out by the farms that are used to produce everything. So it's not a net zero, but it's still a lot less than gasoline. However, I don't like how economically inefficient it is. It requires way too much land, and the increase to the food economy, it's a really, really big blow, and I don't like that. So what would I do if I had unlimited money and I could just spend it however I wanted on ethanol production? Well, first I would look more into the alternatives to corn that are currently under development. So trees and grasses are potential alternatives to corn that are being looked at, and this would reduce food prices because corn wouldn't have to compete with just farm and human consumption, and it would also reduce land consumption because It's just like more compact to use trees than corn. Um, and then it would create my second plan would to create a fuel that is more ethanol based than gasoline based, and to phase out oil consumption, because as previously mentioned, our fuel that we use right now is only 10% ethanol, so we're not really utilizing it as much as we should be because it is a cleaner gas. So once we get that, the better ethanol in production that doesn't have to utilize corn, then boom, we're banging. We use that instead of gasoline. Boom. So, I didn't pull this out of my ass. Here's my works cited. Yeah, thanks for listening. It's been an absolute pleasure.